Everyone, thank you all for joining us for our for another PSL Educational Series webinar. I'm Tony DeSantis. On the Education Committee of the PSL, along with Julia Plummer. And I would like to introduce our two speakers for this evening. I first had the pleasure of meeting both of them in what I believe was the spring of 2018. So 4 years ago now, in northeastern PA, where they run their banding station at Lackawanna State Park. They were gracious enough to welcome me to tag along with them and learn a new perspective into the world of birds, one that I haven't been exposed to until then. Not only did they welcome me, but they also offer the students at their respective schools hands-on experiences with bird banding and avian research, as well as students at neighboring colleges. At Lackawanna State Park, they are also willing to share knowledge with the public, especially children, during both public and group or school educational programs. So they offer insight into the research and, of course, up close views of some remarkable birds. And it goes without saying that it is these experiences that may bring about the next generation of birders and ornithologists. So I would like to welcome Dr. Rob Smith of the University of Scranton and Dr. Meg Hatch from Penn State Scranton.
Meg, do you want to introduce yourself first, or do you want me to go?
You go ahead.
Okay, so hello everybody. Thanks for letting us talk tonight to you about our birds and what we do. A little bit about what we do. Just a little bit of a background on me. I'm, as Tony said, I'm at the University of Scranton. I've been there for about 18 years now. Wow, time does fly. I have my background is I have an undergraduate degree from Elma College, which is a small school in Michigan, which is about, I don't know, a little bit smaller than the University of Scranton. And then I went to the Central Michigan University and got a master's degree in conservation biology. And then I went to the University of Southern Mississippi to work with Frank Moore and study birds and bird migration. I teach conservation biology, I teach animal behavior, and I teach ecology and vertebrate biology at the University of Scranton.
And I'm Meg Hatch. I'm an associate professor of biology at Penn State Scranton. I had my undergraduate and master's were in wildlife biology, and then my PhD was in biology at the University of Kentucky. I teach animal behavior and ecology as well as anatomy and physiology. And my graduate research was actually on reproductive success and parental behavior. And when I came to Pennsylvania about 17 years ago, I was looking for a field site and got connected with Rob, who was gracious to share his location. At that time, it was in the park as well as on some private lands. And I got sucked into the world of migration. So I've been enjoying it ever since. And for the talk today, we'll start with, I'm going to give you kind of an overview of migration, and this will be a test to see how much I've learned in the last few years. So Rob will probably jump in if I miss some details. Then Rob's going to talk a little bit about where we study migration and how we study it. And then we'll take turns talking about some of our published results and then some of our current or future projects.
Meg, I at this point, are you seeing chat? I can't see chat. So if there's any questions in the meantime.
Yeah, I can check it.
Yeah, because sure. I'm showing the screen on my computer. Okay, so. No
problem. Okay. So let's start with, why is it important to study migratory songbirds? And as I'm sure a lot of you know, their populations are declining. You may have seen the fairly recent study by Cornell about the loss of 3 billion birds since 1970. And migrants as a group have declined by about 28% since 1970. So that's of concern, right? We're focusing, that's all migrants. We're focusing on landbird migrants. So those are primarily small birds, like we mostly focus on passerines, as opposed to say waterfowl or raptors or game birds. And the causes of decline are still under investigation, but because migration is between breeding and wintering grounds for the most part, there's concerns about losses or degradation of breeding habitat, and also mismatch, right, of resources because of changes in climate. There's loss of or degradation of winter habitat as well as the habitat that the birds need during migration, or additional costs such as more severe weather events that make it difficult as well. So if we can have the next slide, migration has a lot of costs. And I'll just mention, as I said, that I used to study reproductive success and parental behavior. And really I'm interested in life history, which has trade-offs, right? So whether it's migration or whether it's feeding your chicks, right, there's cost and benefits. So they fit right into this migration scheme. As you know, migration is energetically demanding. The birds need to put on fat. So this is a red-eyed vireo showing its lovely fat accumulation. You know, so they need enough to fuel their entire flight. Migration is a high mortality event. So during the breeding and wintering seasons, adult survival is generally pretty good, but in between, it can be quite high, especially for young birds. As already mentioned, not just an increase in severe weather, but inclement weather can affect migrants and increase their cost rate of travel. Plus, there's predators that are out there trying to catch them. Most of you probably know that a lot of these birds migrate at night, which is cooler and more humid, but also, right, less presence of predators, but they're still encountering them along the way. And as they travel, they're encountering novel habitats that are different than their wintering and breeding grounds and novel sources of food. In addition, the outcome of migration can have effects on even the next year's carryover effects on the next year's survival and the following year's breeding success as well. So there's lots of things that go into a successful migration. So go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that, talk a little bit about how we took this picture so that it doesn't look so dramatic.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. So what you're looking at, so if you were to visit us at our study site, you would see either myself or Meg blowing on their birds' bellies. And what we're trying to do is assess their fat load visually. So what you're looking at here, just so we're clear, is you can actually, you're looking through the skin of this red-eyed vireo. And all that we did, this is a bird that was captured on the Gulf Coast when I was at grad school, just about ready to go across the Gulf of Mexico south on fall migration. You're looking through the skin of the animal. So all we did is we just wet the feathers and pushed them aside. So you're looking through the skin. This is breast muscle. This is fat deposits, or these are fat deposits, and these are fat deposits. So again, you could see through the skin of the animal. We didn't do anything here other than just wet the feathers so we could get a picture. Just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Thanks.
Okay, next slide.
Yes, please.
Okay.
So obviously if migration has evolved, right, the benefits need to exceed the costs. So some of the benefits for birds migrating, especially from the tropics to the temperate region, is abundance of food. You think about the insect explosions, especially right further north, but here as well, and actually reduced competition. The tropics have a lot of individuals competing to breed, so birds may migrate for less competition while they are breeding. Other species, migration is to special locations that are safe places where they can actually molt. So like the grebes and some of the ducks, they migrate to locations where they actually molt all their primaries at once and are not able to fly for a couple of weeks. And then once they grow them back, then they can return to other locations. And then you probably in the last winter, I think it was last winter or recent winter, right? We had some eruptive migrants, so some crossbills coming down, right? So these birds, eruptive migrants, migrate to take advantage of abundant food sources like a extra good pine cone or pine seed crop. So they don't have a seasonal route so much as they go where the food is. Did you want add anything else, Rob?
No, I think it's, no.
Okay. So I'll hand it over to you in a second, but I just want to say that, right, the benefits need to outweigh the costs. And as we'll talk about, what's happening is that the costs are kind of increasing as we degrade habitats, as climate warms. And so the birds are having a harder time balancing the costs and benefits.
Okay, my turn.
Your turn.
Okay, so you probably didn't realize this, but there's a quiz tonight. So this works a lot better if it was in person, so I could have people raising their hands and tell me what these different species are. But what I think we could do tonight is just take a little mental quiz, and then we're all said and done. You can figure out whether you got the answers right or not. But these are just some of the birds that we've captured at our site over the years. And you can see obviously what the title of the slide is: avian migration. That's our research interest. And I'm going to burrow down or narrow down a little bit here in another slide or two about what more specifically we're interested in discussing, or we're trying to figure out answers to questions we're trying to figure answers to. But what I want to do here is just to kind of think about this a little bit. So as we're going through these, think about these, and then and tell me, or I guess you can't tell me. If we were in person, you could raise your hand. But what is this species? Just make a mental note of that one. Or what is this species? So these are birds that we catch. Here's another one individual that we've captured. I don't know if you can see that, but there's actually a band on its leg. So this is a bird that we've banded. And of course, I'll talk more about this in a minute. But one of the things we want to do is we want to put bands on these birds. What about this species? Or this species? This is a species that, thanks to my wife, we have a lot of in our backyard. We for Mother's Day, I asked her, what do you want for a gift? And she says, I want a band of Orioles. So we actually, on that day, we actually captured in our backyard 14 Orioles, 4 of which we banded in the previous year, which was pretty neat. This is a species I spent a whole bunch of my time on following in the Eastern Upper Peninsula of Michigan when I was working on my PhD. You probably know what this one is, but the real question is, if you get this one, you win the prize. So on your honor, if you get this one, you could go ahead and then chat, say tell me if you got it. But here are the answers. So we are, again, mostly interested in land birds, but we also, as I'll tell you, and I'll show you some examples here in a minute, we also have started a project recently looking at owls, more specifically northern Saw-Whet owls in the park. And this was a capture that we had last fall. Obviously, it's not a northern Saw-Whet owl. So what we're interested in then, we being Meg and myself, is avian migration and the ecology of migration. And again, it's more specifically, most of what we do are focused on land birds, but then, like I said, we have this owl project that is just going. Hopefully we'll keep it going. So what we're really getting at here is a topic that we refer to as stopover ecology. So like Meg was saying, these are migratory organisms, and most of the species we study actually migrate at night, and they stop to rest and refuel to get ready for a subsequent night's migration. So what we're interested in then is the ecology of the animals as they're in these stopover sites. So if you can imagine a bird taking off just after dusk, maybe moving north in a seasonally, if it's the spring, north would be the seasonally appropriate direction, or approximately north. And they'll take off just after dark if the conditions are good. And then generally they'll move for a few hours, maybe until 1, 2, 3 o'clock at night, and then set down in hopefully high quality stopover habitat in which they're going to rest in that habitat. They're going to deposit fat stores. They're going to refuel if there's sufficient resources available. And of course, they need cover to keep from getting eaten by predators. So what we're interested in doing then is looking at habitats between the breeding grounds and the wintering grounds, that is the stopover habitats, and asking questions about how these individuals are interacting with the abiotic, and of course, a meaning without means non-living part of their environment, and the biotic or the living parts of their environment, while using these habitats during migration. So that's what we're really focusing on. And if you come out and visit us at our study site, which you're more than welcome to do, we're out in the spring, we were out this morning, and we're out again in the fall, and we're catching birds during migration. I've just kind of given you a general definition of what we used, to define a stopover site, which is basically just a place where a bird pauses between migratory flights. But one of the things that Meg was saying before, and I can't emphasize it enough, we know a lot more about birds on the breeding grounds and a lot more about birds on the wintering grounds in terms of what might be limiting their populations. Less is known about migration, even though migration has some pretty significant mortality associated with it. Even if these animals are able to find high quality habitat, and as Meg said, with changing climate and humans altering habitat, it's making it more and more difficult for these birds to find these high quality stopover sites. So that's where we're focused. And as I was thinking about this presentation, or as we were thinking about this presentation, and I started looking at the different publications and the different areas of research that we focused on over the last 18 years. I think I come down to basically these 3 points. Onroad habitat use, in other words, what habitats are being used and the fitness consequences of using different habitats by migratory land birds. And we'll show you some results with respect to Pennsylvania here in a minute, but we're looking at the influence. One of the major components of the onroad habitat use that we're interested in is the consequences of using non-native vegetation. Exotic, also known as non-native, means that this is a plant species that evolved elsewhere and then ended up in that particular area. For example, in our study site, we have an awful lot of honeysuckle that's not native, and we have Eurasian buckthorn that's not native. The original native plant was plants, the shrubs that were there, we're in the shrubland, would have been viburnum, which has basically been removed by Viburnum beetle, and some native dogwoods. So we're interested in the use and the fitness consequences of using habitats that have a lot of exotic vegetation in them for birds during migration. Some questions that we've addressed with our work out in Michigan is the influence of, or the importance of coastal habitats and emergent aquatic insects. So some of the work that we've done in Michigan, and this goes back to my PhD dissertation, is about, so for example, one of the best places to look at birds during spring migration is the northern shoreline of Lake Huron in the Upper Peninsula, Eastern Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is where I did my PhD and my master's degree. So the birds are piling up at the coast, or using these coastal habitats. And some of the evidence that we've published and other people have subsequently published is it seems like these emergent aquatic insects, midges that are present in mayflies, that are present growing as larvae in the substrate, basically in the benthos, in the mud and the muck at the bottom of the lake, they merge out into these adult forms and they come ashore to breed. And they seem like real important evidence suggests a really critical habitat for migrating land birds. We're also interested in the timing of arrival and condition upon arrival at northerly breeding grounds or northerly stopover sites, and we'll show you some results associated with that, especially with respect to age differences and sex differences in timing and condition. So it's not uncommon in spring. Males oftentimes in most species migrate before females. Not so common in the fall. Sometimes some species, females tend to migrate before males and vice versa, but this is kind of an area of active research. I'm also interested in, we'll talk a little bit about, and Meg will talk a little bit about her research in immunological condition as it relates to what's going on in these stopover sites. And we're also interested in the how weather and climate influence timing of arrival and condition upon arrival. So for example, in a cold spring, birds tend to be delayed in terms of their migratory timing as opposed to a warm spring. More on that in a minute. And lastly, and something that I'm really interested in, but unfortunately we really haven't been able to look at much lately in the last few years, is, and Meg alluded to this a little bit earlier, is linkages between phases. So things that happen during the wintering period that carry over and affect reproductive performance in the breeding season, or things that happen during migration that can affect things here being maybe weather or longer term climatic events that happen during maybe the winter period or during spring migration, affecting when birds get to our site, and maybe the condition that they're in. So I have some results to show you there. So we study stopover ecology at multiple scales. Today, we're going to talk more about the within patch scale and the individual level scale. But we do work at 3 different scales. Landscape level, the landscape is a real broad scale. So some of the questions that we are interested in addressing is like, what is the effect of rivers or lakes? I've already mentioned before my interest in our interest in coastal habitats and emergent aquatic insects. So we found that in coastal habitats in and around Michigan, those that seem to attract birds. In other words, the Great Lakes in Michigan seem to play a real important role in providing important stopover or elements of stopover habitats to migratory landbirds. And I have this picture of Lackawanna State Park here just to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about with patch size, isolation, and surrounding matrix. So here's the park here, and of course the park is this was taken, I think probably the leaves were off the trees. So these are conifers here, but of course these are all deciduous trees that don't have leaves on them here and here. So this is the park is, for the most part, a lot of it's forested, but you could see that it's surrounded by a matrix of significantly human altered habitats, fields. So some of the things that we're interested in is, what the size of this patch, does this affect how migrants, the number of migrants that are in the habitat, and how migrants are using that habitat, and what about the effect of this surrounding matrix? Does this, maybe these open fields tend to concentrate birds into these habitats, which evidence suggests they do, which emphasizes the importance of like, say for example, Lackawanna State Park is a stopover site. And isolation is basically talking about the distance from one patch to another. And the amount of inhospitable habitat between those patches. We're also interested in within patch effects, especially, as I've mentioned, and we'll talk about here in a bit, the use and the fitness consequences of native versus non-native vegetation in these stopover habitats. And then also, as I've mentioned already, timing differences as it relates to age and sex, and immunological condition, as well as parasites and energetic condition at the individual level. So we kind of look at things depending upon the project in a multi-scale approach. We've done some research and published some information where we had some funding in Michigan that we studied this, where we looked at all 3 levels at the same time. So this is a slide to tell you a little bit about where we study birds. And in the last couple of years, we've really been focusing in Lackawanna County. But these other areas in Michigan, they're color-coded to represent different projects. So we had some funding from the Fish and Wildlife Service to look at coastal habitat use in these counties. We had some funding also from Fish and Wildlife to look at coastal habitat here. And then some work down here in Berry County, and then some work here in collaboration with a good friend of mine at Michigan State University. So how do we study? Well, so I don't pretend to be a radar guru. This is why we collaborate. But I have a colleague at the University of Delaware who's a radar ornithologist. And this is so we use NexRad weather radar and as well as on-the-ground surveys to get at these landscape level questions. And recall that these landscape level questions include things like how important are rivers and lakes, and what about habitat fragmentation and patch size, et cetera. So we can use these radars to give us an indication of how birds are using habitat at a landscape level. So this is just an image. It's a composite image that comes from a study that we did in the Great Lakes region. And we were, it would be associated with this project here. But my colleague at the University of Delaware was monitoring, this is Green Bay, this is Milwaukee, this is Grand Rapids, this is Detroit, Cleveland, and this is the Pellston radar. And this is a composite image of multiple days averaged together. And what you're looking at here, of course, what radar is doing, it's pulsing out energy, and the energy is being reflected off of water and it's coming back. And of course, birds up in the atmosphere are just little flying packages of water as far as the radar is concerned. So this is showing you high relative bird density to low relative bird density. So you can see, for example, in this part of the Cleveland part of the study here, pretty high densities of birds here in the coastal habitats. And in this area in Grand Rapids, this part of Michigan, a lot of birds. I don't have a slide that shows this in this presentation, but you can actually, at a finer degree of resolution with the radar, you can actually see birds coming out of, as they're taking off just after dusk, when the radar is picking them up, you can see outlines of rivers and things that tells you, okay, that river habitat, there's a lot of birds coming out of that. That's probably good habitat. So this is one way in which we address landscape level questions combined with some on the ground survey work. Here is basically within patch and individual level questions. And I have a little video here that's going to take me a little bit to try to make it work because I wasn't able to get it to work really that easily. But I'll show it to you because I'm assuming that some of you have probably seen banding happen. I want to show you a video for those of you that haven't seen it happen. But what we're interested in doing is getting our hands on the birds to get at these within patch and individual level questions. We also, of course, are surveying in patches. So here's pictures of me surveying vegetation at Lackawanna State Park. Here's a malaise trap in which we're surveying, basically trapping flying arthropods because we're interested in what the birds are eating. we have a setup of these acoustic recorders that we've purchased over the years from Cornell that we place out in habitats. So you can strap them to a tree. You can program them using a computer to turn on and turn off at the same time. So you can imagine having 25 or 30 of these recorders out throughout Lackawanna State Park that come on and go at 6 a.m. all at the same time, record for 10 minutes, then go off, then come on at 7 a.m. and then go off. So then we can, of course, listen to that to the dawn chorus, and it tells us a little bit about what birds are in the habitat. And here you can see some bird bands. One of the things that we do with all of the birds we catch is as quickly as we can is we put a band on the bird. Each of these bands are different sizes for different sized birds, and each band has an individual number on it. Again, some of you may already know this, but the neat thing about this is that what this allows us to do then is either year after year, we recapture birds that we've banded in previous years. We caught a couple of birds this morning that we had caught in previous years. But one of the really neat things is sometimes people from other areas will capture your birds. So or will capture birds from other areas. So last fall, we were running an owl banding station for Saw-Whets and we had 4 or 5, we call them foreign recaptures. In other words, they were banded at another site and we caught them at our site. One came from Ontario, was banded. Another was banded in Arkansas. Another was banded down by Hershey, Pennsylvania. So that's one of the things that these bands will tell us. One of the neatest things that examples of bird band, what banding can tell you, comes from when I was working on my PhD. We banded an American redstart in eastern Upper Peninsula, Michigan, that 2.5 weeks later was captured in western Alaska. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about how birds are moving and where they're moving, et cetera, how far they're moving. Meg takes blood samples, as you can see. These are mist nets. This is how we catch birds. So this is a yellow-rumped warbler hanging in a mist net. Here's a mist net setup. And what we'll do is every 30 minutes or so, we walk around and we extract birds from the mist nets, or from these nets, and we take them back to a centralized location where we'll take these morphological measures. Maybe Meg will take a blood sample. For some species, we're also interested in feather growth, but I don't have time to talk about that unless there are questions about it afterwards. So we might pull a feather sample. So what I want to do now is see if I can play this video. So bear with me. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to try this.
While you're working on that, I'll just mention, Rob, there is a question about banding in the Q&A. I don't know if we want to answer that now or wait till the end.
Sure. Is that something?
It's a question about capturing birds and banding them on the coast of Texas and Louisiana, for example, after a physiological event like crossing the Gulf.
I don't see the question at all.
So yeah, I mean, I can type an answer, but it says, I'd like to hear your opinion on catching and banding birds at the coast of Texas or Louisiana, for example, who have just flown all the way across the Gulf at a great physiological cost.
So that's a great question. And I can tell you firsthand, because when I was a grad student, we ran stations in coastal Louisiana and coastal Alabama. One of the real interesting things is most of those birds actually, if environmental conditions are right, they'll actually overfly the coast and go 100 or more 200 kilometers inland. I can also tell you this is based on empirical evidence. I mean, clearly there's going to be some ramifications associated with catching birds that are stressed like that. But I can also tell you that the data suggest or show actually that it doesn't really, it's stressful. It certainly is stressful to the birds, but it doesn't come at a high measurable cost as far as we're able to tell. In other words, you ban the bird, you turn it loose, and it stays in. One of the things about some of these habitats, like the Chenier habitats in Louisiana, for example, is there's kind of these patches of forest that are surrounded by grasslands and wetlands. So these birds will stay in these habitats for a little while. And again, what I'm saying here is based on recaptures. These birds are staying in there for a while, and they're actually gaining fat. Remember, it's important that everybody understand that there's no way we want to harm the birds. We want to just borrow them for a little bit, take some measures on them, and turn them loose. And in a well-operated banding station, birds shouldn't be held in captivity for longer than 30 minutes to an hour. I don't know if that answers your question. I would suggest to you that the information that we get off of that kind of a situation far overshadows any kind of additional physiological stress that we might put on the bird. But that's an excellent question, and it does have some effect on birds, especially as they're coming off the Gulf of Mexico. Some of these birds actually are of course, these wouldn't be birds that would be getting. So let me also say, if a bird is in poor condition, they're not going to hold it. They're going to turn it loose as quickly as possible. And that just kind of re-emphasizes, we don't want to injure them. We want to just borrow them for a little bit and collect some data on them. So if a bird is in poor condition, it'll get turned loose as quickly as possible. And one of the interesting things, which is kind of gets at the cost of migration that we see, is that a number of the birds that, in some instances, some of these birds, when they arrive on the Gulf Coast, are in such poor physiological shape that you can almost go up and pick them up because they just can't get out of the way. And of course, you just let those be. So I don't know if that answered the question. Is there more to it?
I mean, it seems good to me.
Okay. I mean, was there any follow-up, any other questions? For some reason, I don't see the chat.
Yeah, no other response.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So thanks for that. Let me see if I can show you. Now I have to figure out how to share my screen again. Okay, so. How come I can't? Oh, here we go. I'm sorry. You'd think I'd know Zoom after I've used it so often. Okay, so do you see, Meg, do you see it? Yes, okay. All right, so this is just a short video and I'll play it twice at least. I'll turn the volume up. this is a video of basically Beth, my wife, and I. So this is a little bit of a story real quick. So we just kind of one spring a number of years ago, we were opening Landbird nets, and we had a Saw-Whet owl fly into it. Completely unexpected. You should have heard, and Beth, my wife, happened to be out there, and we got it out of the net, and we were looking at it, and we were high-fiving each other. It's like, this was so cool. So you know what she did? She said, I want nets to catch Saw-Whet owls with for my Christmas present. so I bought nets to catch Saw-Whet owls with, not knowing if we were going to get anything. And then that following fall, we put these nets up, she and I, and started. So we have to use playback. You might hear this when I start playing the video. We play the continuous playback of a male calling, toot toot toot, my goodness, we caught him. Started catching owls, and that was pretty neat. And this is a picture, video of me banding. I'm not doing any morphological measures on it because the video doesn't go long enough, but it gives you an idea of what. So this is at night with an owl, but we do something very similar with the landbirds. I don't know if you hear the toot 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 in the background.
I'll just mention as it's going also that these are Fish and Wildlife Service bands, and we have permits both from the state, from the federal government, and from the park to be able to do this.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. The other thing to point out is, for those of you that have not seen this, that's the safest way to handle a small bird. It might look like I'm strangling it, but I'm not. There's two main ways to handle a small bird, and this is called the bander's grip for obvious reasons, because it allows me to band the bird. In the meantime, I have the wings controlled under my, kind of in the palm of my hand, so they're not fluttering too much. So okay, so I'm gonna try to go back to sharing my other screen. Let's see. Okay, which screen? This one. Okay. Right. So that's some of the. You're Meg, thumbs up. You see the screen? You seen a video? Okay. All right. So this is some of the ways in which we catch, and we collect some of the data that we do, and now we can tell you a little bit of some of the results that we have. And I think, Meg, this is where you pick up.
Sorry, so I unmute and remute. Yeah. So just a little bit about some of the results that we've had. As you've already heard us talk quite a bit about, habitat is really important. So one of our earlier questions, and Rob had a grant from the DCNR, was to study shrub, scrub, and forested habitat in terms of presence of warblers or migratory birds, and also insect abundance. So in this slide here, you can see it was differentiated between long distance and short distance migrants. So short distance are going to be those, and Rob can correct me if I'm wrong, mostly that overwinter, say in the southern United States, versus long distance, they're going to be in Central or South America. And in both types of species, you can see from the graphs that the shrub is in hash marks. And so shrub habitat actually there were more, these are detections on transects. There were more detections for both long distance and short distance migrants in shrub than in forested habitat. So the importance of this study, and this was the same with our capture rates as well, and a slightly higher diversity in the shrubs. And the importance of this is shrub scrub habitat is disappearing, and there's a lot of focus on forests, which are important habitat, and many of these birds breed in forested habitat, but we found that they are using, even the forest breeders are using the shrub habitat, and that it was important for their stopover. But presence and absence is not the only indicator of quality of habitat, right? So we also looked at mass gain, and this is actually, that study was for spring migration. This is fall migration, where we looked at mass gain in seven different species in again, shrub habitat. And what we found is most of the species, so 5 of them, there was no significant gain in mass. For one species, the American redstart on the right there, they did gain mass. And you can see there's a difference between older birds and younger birds, the older birds gaining mass more quickly than younger birds. But in common yellowthroats on the left, there was actually mass loss. And when we looked at it further, it was a difference in the sexes. So the female common yellowthroats were actually losing mass, whereas the males were sort of steady. So mass gain is an important fitness consequence for these birds. And in this habitat, which is, as Rob has mentioned, is dominated by exotic vegetation, at least in the fall, it's not turning out to be the greatest habitat for them. Even though they're present, they're not fueling at significant rates.
Yeah, so real quick, just so we're clear, what we're using here is we're using changes in mass as an indicator of fat gain or fat loss. Presumably, if a bird's depositing fat, it increases mass. If it's not depositing, if it's losing fat or maybe even muscle, it's losing mass. So what we can do is we can use some statistics to estimate rate of mass gain, which could be an increase like this, or it could be a decrease like this. Or as you can see, this is a busy table, but what this is basically telling you is that only 2 species, here P is 0.049, P is 0.031, and only 2 species did we find evidence of mass change. And in common yellowthroat, that evidence was negative. They were losing mass. And when I looked at it further, we saw that it was females that seemed to be driving the signature. And interestingly enough, we found mass gains in by the way, AHY, for those of you that don't know, stands for after hatch year, which would be an older bird, and HY would be a bird that would, so this is fall, so an HY bird would have been hatched just that previous breeding season. Okay, are you ready for the next one?
Okay. Thanks. And then also we had what's called like a natural experiment, which was unfortunate, but in 2007, the Viburnum Leaf Beetle showed up in the park. And you can see from that picture, I mean, they just skeletonized the local viburnum, which is, I think the common name is arrowroot viburnum. And even though it was only about 14% of the vegetation, Rob had done a lot of vegetation surveys. You can see there in that graph that the dogwood and the honeysuckle, there wasn't a real change between 2000 and 2015, but in the viburnum, it basically got reduced to nothing. And it didn't take, how's my addition? It didn't take 8 years for the viburnum to disappear. It was only a couple years. The beetle, the larvae in that picture, the larvae eat the leaves, and then they go in the ground and the adults emerge and the adults eat them as well. And it had a big effect. So we found that in the years that we had studied prior to infestation, we were catching an overall capture rate of 241 birds per net hour, whereas it dropped to 220 the 3 years after infestation. We captured more species prior to infestation than after. And again, with this mass change, now this is in the spring, but the mass change, originally 7 of 9 species were having significant mass gain in the spring. And after the loss of viburnum, none of them had significantly gained mass. So a real big effect for the loss of one of the native species that was still in the habitat.
Is this me?
This is you.
Okay. I recall that I also mentioned I was interested, I say I, but we, of course, this is always we, arrival timing and factors that influence timing of arrival and condition upon arrival. So this is a study that is currently in review at Animal Migration that Meg and I recently submitted. And let me just, it's a busy slide, but let me just give you a kind of an overview. So this is just one species out of, I think, 6 or 7, maybe 5 or 6 species that we looked at. Similar things happen in some other species, but what I've always been interested in is factors that occur to the birds prior to their arrival that might affect when they get to the breeding grounds or when they get to a more northerly stopover site like ours. And so what we did is we did this. So this is more on this in a minute, but this is based on the wintering period, and this is based on the migratory period. So there are 2 components to this study. One is a weather component. So what we did, here's our study site in northeastern Pennsylvania. And what we did is we downloaded weather data from all of the weather stations bounded by this rectangle here and this rectangle here. And this was during April and May. So each of these dots here represents an average arrival day for common yellowthroats in a given year relative to temperatures experienced here. Now, think about this. This is where the temperatures on average we were taking them from, and this is where the birds are arriving at our site. So this is a relationship that's pretty significant. It's pretty strong. You can see it's pretty tight to that best fit line. And what it's showing us is that birds that are migrating in years when temperatures are warmer, 21, 22 degrees, are arriving earlier. So arrival day, an ordinal day is number of days past January 1st. So this is later, this is earlier. So you can see that birds that are migrating in years with average temperatures that are lower arrive at the migratory destination on here in these northeastern Pennsylvania on average later. So there's an association between what's going on temperature-wise here and what's happening when birds are arriving at our site. So I was interested in that. And then we were also interested in weather events or climate events on the wintering grounds. So this is May temperatures represented here. This graphic is showing us, so what I did, and I'd be happy to discuss this in more detail if you're interested. What we did was we downloaded data for, so ENSO, El Nino Southern Oscillation, El Nino, La Nina events. So this is arrival day on this axis. So this would be the average day in which these birds arrive at our site. Again, this is common yellowthroats, plus or minus the 1 standard error. That's what represented by the whiskers. So in the data were collected, so this is the prior January, February, March period. And again, these data are available. The NOAA, it comes through, you can get that access to this. So what I did basically is I went in and I took all of these different years of these 18 years or so that we have in this data set, and I classified the January, February, March, and this is, again, the details I could get into later, as either an El Nino winter, a La Nina winter. So these are called anomalies. So that means they differ from what would be kind of average. So a non-ENSO year would be a year that's kind of average. El Nino events, I don't know if you know about El Nino, La Nina, but in a real kind of general sense, the temperatures off in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Ecuador and in Peru, in that area, are, when it's an El Nino year, those temperatures are abnormally higher. In a La Nina year, those temperatures are abnormally cooler. In a non-ENSO year, those temperatures are basically not considered anomalous, so they're average. And one of the things that happens with these El Nino, La Nina events, maybe you're aware of this, is not only does it affect climate and weather in coastal Peru and Ecuador and South America, but it also, even as far north as Western North America, and even up into the Midwest. So, but I was interested in what was going on in January through March, which is when these birds would have been wintering. So again, the La Nina, El Nino events also have effects on climate in the wintering areas where these birds exist. And what we have here is we have or some data that show us that what's happening on the wintering grounds in El Nino years, birds are arriving at our site earlier. So A, B, and B. What this means is A differs from B. Where this is AB, this means that this doesn't statistically significant. It's not significantly different from this or this, but this and this is. These two comparisons are. So what this is saying is that there's something going on the wintering grounds in El Nino years relative to non-ENSO events and possibly even La Nina events that are affecting, that seem to be or are associated with at least when birds get to the migratory destination. So what this is saying here is that we have events during migration that affect arrival timing, and we have data that suggests that events during the wintering period, which of course these birds would be probably wintering somewhere down here, affecting their arrival time. Here's some other work. I don't know, some of you may know Mike Carey, Dr. Mike Carey. He's retired now from the University of Scranton, but he had he has a wonderful data set, a long-term data set on field sparrows here in northeastern Pennsylvania. And he worked just outside of Lackawanna State Park. And so like about 1986 to 2005 or 2006, he was out every spring, every day, and he would capture field sparrows on the nests and color band them and measure, take measurements of their breeding biology, but he also knew when the birds arrived. So what we could do then is we know the arrival day for each of these individual males and females. And what we did with this data set is basically, here's our study site north. Remember, I'm interested in timing of arrival and factors maybe during the wintering period or the migratory period that affect what's going on, what's going on down here during the wintering period, affecting when birds get to the breeding grounds up here. So obviously we don't know where these field sparrows winter. So I did my best estimate. So most of them winter in this area, although there's a good number of field sparrows, according to eBird, that winter over here, and also the birds of the world species accounts now. But what I did is in this area, I downloaded weather data from weather stations, and we had the arrival timing of the birds here in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I ran this, and I could talk more about this later, this statistical analysis that literally took 3 or 4 days to complete because it was running it was doing so many calculations. But the long and short of it is it ended up finding the software found a pretty tight relationship between temperature these birds were experiencing. And again, this is data on average from here, relating it to arrival timing here. So you can see temperature versus arrival day. And it found this window between February 9th and May 6th that explained this variation pretty well. And you can see it's a pretty tight relationship. So what this is saying here again is that events during the wintering period, as well as probably during some migration from this area here, are associated with timing of arrival of these birds in northeastern Pennsylvania. I think this is the last thing I'm going to talk about for now, and then we'll go to Meg real quick. I guess I got to speed up a little bit. I'm having too much fun talking about birds. This is some stuff we're working on now, so I'll just really quickly summarize it. And this is where I'm going to go once the semester gets over and I get done grading finals. We finally have a long-term data set. We started banding in 2004. And of course, this is last spring. We don't have this spring. And this is, of course, is missing because of COVID. But what we're demonstrating here, this is average arrival timing across years based on statistical modeling, plus or minus standard error here. The interpretation of this graph is this. Catbirds on average were arriving, here, this is later, this is earlier, ordinal day 132, 135, 137.5, 140. This was the average arrival day back in 2004. This is the average arrival day now, or as of last year. This is statistically significant trend. This comes out to be something like somewhere around 6 or 7 days, I think. So birds are on average arriving 6 or 7 days earlier now than they were back when we first started. Similarly, we're seeing something, this is statistically significant, even though the standard error bars are so wide. Common yellowthroats are arriving a couple of days earlier now than in the past. This is the data are missing here because I didn't have enough individual captures during these years to include in the model. Now, when we look at average temperatures from the airport during what I've defined as spring migratory period, and this is just at Scranton Airport in April and May. There's variability to this, but this is statistically significant. And the regression is, the model is telling me that about 0.08 degrees Celsius increase per year from the time that we started to now. So this to me suggests that catbirds are potentially responding to climate change. And this is what other people are finding as well. Okay, you're up.
Okay. And I just briefly mentioned I answered 2 questions in the Q&A. One was if anything if the birds eat the Viburnum Leaf Beetle, which they don't. And someone was asking about how long birds stop over because they have a blackpoll that was in their yard for about 4 days. And so some of the birds do stop over. The number of days depends on their condition and weather and some other things. So another aspect of arrival timing is if there are sex differeces. And so one thing we looked at is whether or not there was a difference in male and female arrival in gray catbirds. So protandry is the term for when males arrive before females. And in a lot of dimorphic species, so where the male and female differ in plumage, you often find, like common yellowthroats, the males will arrive before the females. So the thought is there's stronger selection for males to arrive early in those birds versus monomorphic birds like catbirds, where you can't tell their sex until they're either breeding or you do it genetically. But for example, white-throated sparrows are also monomorphic, and they've been demonstrated to have protandry. The males arrive earlier in the spring than females, and we have that as they're migrating through our site as well. So this just shows that their age differences, older birds tend to arrive earlier than younger birds, but there is no real sex difference. Males and females, their average arrival is similar. And you notice some of the numbers are small for females. This was only a couple of years into our study. But as we've gotten more and more catbirds, this trend holds up. Just check real quick. There's something. Okay. There's an ENSO question, which you can answer later, Rob.
Yeah, I'm trying to answer it, but I can't. I'll keep trying. You keep going. Oh, I got to change this up. There you go. Okay, sorry.
There you go. Yeah, thanks. So then another thing we're interested in, and I'll mention now, I realized because I'd removed this slide earlier, we didn't explain why is arrival timing important, right? There's lots of evidence that the earlier you arrive, the better your reproductive success if you're a migrant. And also if you arrive in better condition, you're going to have greater success as well. So something I've been interested in is sort of physiological ecology, or how the physiology of the animal relates to the environment or habitat they're in. So this is just one of the studies where we looked at both the amount of fat the birds had, and it's a score, so that's why you see these lines here, and parameters in their blood, including what's called a heterophil to lymphocyte ratio. So that's 2 types of white blood cells, and it's been found that that ratio is an indicator of stress. So we find that, again, the later the date, that's a later arrival, right? So the earlier birds tend to have more fat, which may also be hedging some bets against poorer conditions when you arrive earlier. And I realize this, we don't have a trend line here, but in general, the later the birds, the more stressed they are. They have a higher HL ratio. And I'll just mention, for those of you that haven't seen bird blood, that their red blood cells are oval rather than round like ours, and they are nucleated. So our red blood cells don't retain their nucleus, but the birds do. So there's 2 white blood cells in here, and all the rest are red blood cells. So I'm interested in the different factors and their physiology of the catbirds as they arrive. And if we can have the next slide. Something that we're currently looking at in terms of condition is feather mites. So there's sort of been a resurgence in interest in feather mites. They're an arthropod. You can see the sort of dust-like specks on, it's actually a catbird wing. And the current data really shows that the mites aren't necessarily detrimental. It's more likely they're commensal. So that there's evidence that they're eating some of the Europegial oils, the oils that the birds use to waterproof, and maybe some, fungal spores and even bacteria, and that people have looked for a negative effect and haven't really found it in wild birds. Of course, in domestic birds and in pets, mite infestation can be very detrimental. But so we're in the initial stages of just sort of describing. In the graph, you can see that the mite prevalence or intensity, so intensity is how many mites per bird, changes seasonally. So it's higher in the spring than in the fall for some of the species. And those of you that can see well, notice there's black-capped chickadee in there, which is not a migrant, but a resident species. And that prevalence, which is the number of species you observe, the number that are infected. And prevalence really does vary between species. So in the graph, you can see that gray catbirds have about a 47% prevalence across seasons. Ovenbirds, for some reason, have a very high prevalence, and also veeries. We find that the thrushes seem to have a lot of them as well. So we are continuing to look at this. We are trying to do, we've done just intensity where we just put a score based on an estimated number of mites per wing. And we're now looking more closely to do an actual count of these and looking at now not just species differences, but age and sex differences in the presence of mites. Now to the cute species.
To the what species?
Cute.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, we're finishing up here. By the way, thanks for hanging with us. Just a couple more things to say. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the owl research that we've been doing. I mentioned earlier about how we got it started. And we were lucky enough to have Mary Bogert, who is a former Keystone student who went on to Bloomsburg and was interested in doing a master's degree. And she heard about the facts. I don't know how she, to this day, I really still don't understand how she found out about us. But the neat thing is that she wanted to do her master's project at our site, and she did. So for the last 2 falls, we captured birds. So prior to that, it was just Beth and myself, and occasionally maybe Meg would be out or some other people. And of course, I was banding. I was doing a lot of work, especially when we early banding for owls, early October, overlaps with late banding for landbirds. And by that time, getting up at early in the morning to band landbirds, and then going to teach classes, and then coming back in the evening to band owls. I was pretty grouchy. You just ask my wife. So I was really grateful. So we were just doing it 1 or 2 nights a week, like in October and November. But when Mary came on board, we ended up probably banding maybe 5 nights a week. So there's a lot more banding effort. And we caught, or I should say we, because she ran most of the project after we got set up, but we caught a lot of owls. So like last fall, we got, I think it's like 94 owls. What we were initially interested in doing is seeing if these birds, we just kind of categorizing, to my knowledge, that I think it was the 90s when the last time somebody had said that they detected one of these owls in the park. So what we wanted to do is see, first of all, are the animals here during migration? And then we were interested in seeing if we could tell differences between males and females. And in some instances you can, because the males are bigger than the females, but in a lot of instances, the males and the female body sizes overlap. So sometimes you can resolve whether it's a male or female, but a lot of times you can't using morphological measurements. But what we wanted to do is see what was the timing of the migration? Are they migrating through through the park? And what, if so, when were they doing it? And then the layer that Mary added was one of the things that happens with a lot of these migratory banding stations for Saw-Whet owls is you broadcast a calling male. And when you're broadcasting the calling male, for some reason, it brings in females. And this is during the non-breeding season. So I don't really know. I don't know if anybody really knows what's going on, but it works. But what we added to this, or what Mary added to this, I should say, with her project is she had a female call. So if you can imagine, we had two groups of nets set out in the park. One group of nets would have a game caller broadcasting the male call, and the other group of nets would have a game caller broadcasting a female call. We'd run that setup one night, and then we'd switch the callers. So the previous night that was the male call, now it's the female call. So we switched them every night to see. And we found some evidence that there are some that are males that are in the park, which is novel. One of the things that we're adding to that is I have a colleague at the University of Scranton who's going to sex these birds for us using blood. So we took blood samples as well. And you can actually use the DNA to tell whether these are males or females. So that's going to give us some insight into whether they're males. Again, because like I said, most of the birds that are captured on fall migration are females, but we don't know. Maybe it's just that the males aren't coming to the male call. The other component was our birds, if so we demonstrated that that at least we know females and some males are in the habitat during fall migration, but are they breeding here? So that's why Joe and Aaron are part of this too. Now, Joe and Aaron are also former Keystone students, but now they're again at Bloomsburg. They're all working with Dr. Clay Corbin in his lab. And this is what they're doing now for their master's projects, microplastics in landbirds, and basically Europidgeal oil feathers and feather parasites in landbirds as well. But they're also involved. They were also involved in this project trying to demonstrate whether we can find evidence of these birds breeding in these habitats. So Tony was involved in this too. And so what Tony was doing, he's doing these calls. Maybe Tony could say a little bit more about it if he wants to, I don't know. And as well as Mary and Joe and Aaron and some other people, they were out with nets trying to lure these birds into, if they're out there, if birds are in the habitat during the breeding season. So they started in March and continued, I think, through maybe April or so. You'd expect if you're using the proper protocols, you'd expect if the birds are there, you might be able to see them. And there was some evidence of that, playing broadcasting the male call and getting a response during the breeding season. So that suggests that males were there. Joe was also they were also broadcasting the female call, and there's some possibility that there was a female that responded. So we know that the birds are there during the breeding season, but we don't know that they're actually breeding. The only way you could truly demonstrate that is to find an active nest. So perhaps not as strong an inference as finding an active nest is something that happened about 4 or 5 days ago when we caught a fledgling Saw-Whet owl in our nets when we were netting for landbirds. So yeah, I think there's pretty good evidence that the animals are here. One of the things I'm interested in, I've tasked Joe with this, is to when these. So I don't know if you can see here. This is the adult plumage. This actually, of course, maybe you've noticed this. This, of course, is not a northern Saw-Whet owl. It's a wood thrush. But this is the adult plumage. This is the fledgling plumage. So the question I have, and I tasked Joe to find this out, is how long do the fledglings stay in this plumage, and how far do the fledglings in this plumage range from the nest cavity? So if they stay fairly close to them, so somebody must have written about this, and maybe there's some research out there, but if they stay fairly close to the nest cavity, this suggests that the bird was certainly nesting in the area. So that was pretty exciting. That got a lot of high fives when we caught that one, right, Meg? We were pretty excited about that. And this is just, I've already told you a little bit about how we catch birds, these owls in the fall. And this is just kind of a rehash of that. And we take the measurements, etc. So I think with that, Are we done? Okay. Thank you for your attention. We are happy to address any questions that you might have.
Please feel free to put questions in chat or the question and answer wherever you prefer, and we'll find them and we'll get them answered. So some good comments. People found this fun to listen to, thought-provoking. That must have been a surprise to get that juvenile Saw-Whet owl.
The fun thing is that picture got shared a bunch because they're just so darn cute.
I have a question. So do male Saw-Whet calls attract females and females attract males?
Do males? Yes, that's what it seems to be. The male calls. That's the kind of the thing, right? Because you don't really know for sure what's going on. You put these game callers out, and certainly the male call is attracting females, which are the bigger. And thanks for catching that, Bob. But we put the female call. We had some difficult. Or I shouldn't say we, I should say Mary had some difficult time getting it so that it was you had to get it kind of magnified so that it would play, but it did seem to it attracted females, but it also, we did catch males. We haven't run the statistics to see if there was a statistically significant effect. One of the problems potentially associated with that, until we get the blood sample results, is small sample size, so we probably won't be able to determine whether there's a significant difference or not. But I can say that it, anecdotally, yes, it seemed to work.
I have a question. Is there a paper that goes into the results you showed about migration timing, temperature, and common yellow throats that they could read more about?
Hopefully soon. I could certainly, if who's ever asking that, I could send you the copy of what we've written. And in there, I go into some depth in the narrative, and I cite other papers. If that person who's ever asking that wants to send me an email, I could certainly follow up with some literature. So my email address is robert.smith@scranton.edu. I'll say it again, robert.smith@scranton.edu. And anybody else that might have some additional questions, I'd welcome them. Yeah, certainly. Oh, there you go.
Perfect.
It's like, I taught for what, a year and a half using Zoom. You'd think I'd remember how to do all this stuff.
So going back to the questions about banding on the coast of Texas. So the question is, I'm curious specifically for banding at the coast of Texas and Louisiana, what information could be gained and what would be important enough to risk injury to tired birds? So when they're sorry to hammer into this. So I think that's a relevant question. Like, what is that? What is the important scientific information that you would get from banding birds at that Texas, Louisiana coast?
Well, I'd first like to say, again, I want to really emphasize that we really don't want to injure the birds. And if a bird is in poor condition, we'll leave it alone. What information? So people might disagree, and but as the scientist in me would argue strongly that it gives us information about things that I've just talked about. But it's even more important for down on the Gulf Coast as birds are coming across the Gulf, because if you've been down to the Gulf Coast, there's a lot of open area that's unsuitable for migratory birds. So getting information about how you can create habitat or how you can manipulate habitat for enhancing habitat for these animals that are in pretty dire straits. I think that there's a strong argument to be made for that. I understand people's concerns, and I'm glad for that. And that's where I'm coming from with respect to the scientist that I am. Again, the idea is we want to use these birds borrow them a little bit of time, get some information on them as quickly as we can, turn them loose. And then the idea then is to take that information and then use that information, maybe the federal government, the state government, private nonprofit organizations like the Nature Conservancy, to manipulate habitats to maximize the likelihood that these birds are able to exist and gain fat in these coastal habitats. And I think it's especially a critical area. Every place you go to look at, if you're a migratory bird, it's tough as a migratory bird. Let's just, of course, we know that. And what we need to do is we need to try to make it as easy as possible, even as we, as humans, have made it more and more difficult as a consequence of habitat alteration and habitat loss. So what we can find out, and we get to let the birds tell us about habitat quality, for example, like we would recommend, for example, not to use or maybe go in and remove the non-native plant species, because the native plant species hold more arthropods, which are absolutely critical to these insectivorous migrating land birds. And I would argue again, I think that is critical to maintaining populations of a lot of these species.
If I may also add, Rob, like some of these stations, right, they're established, they're year-round, and again, the evidence in terms of recapture shows we aren't having a large effect. But also these are just small specific areas. So if there was an effect, it would only be a small, right, area. It's not all birds and all migrants.
That's right. There's a comment, and you might want to comment on this comment. You might consider setting up a nest box study program in the area to explore the extent of breeding northern saw-whet owls in the Northeast. So I wonder if you wanted to share any thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. It takes money.
Yeah.
I need to have some support. I mean, to be honest with you, the research, the Saw-Whet owl research we need to try to find some funding to keep it going, because I just can't do it myself or find another graduate student. I mean, I have enough money available to me through the University of Scranton to cover equipment costs, but I don't have money available to hire a field crew. And so nest box, boy, I'd love to do that. But that takes time, and that takes funding, and the funding really isn't so much about building the nest boxes. I could do that in my garage easy. It's the time to monitor them and to do it. And you want to do it in as scientifically rigorous manner as possible. It's a great idea, you know. And and I've put some boxes out for other species, but it's just not enough time in the day to do all the stuff I want to do. So I need to retire.
Tony, we need to add that to the cavity nesting species in the parks.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's also a question. Would you kindly share the female call that you used as your audio lure for attracting males? And could you share the results in general terms?
Let's see, can you read that to me again? I'm not.
Can you share the audio file that you used, the female call?
So you want to hear it?
No, I think this is from Robert Mulvihill. He's asking if you could pass that on. And
certainly. I'd be happy to send it to you. And
then you also asked, could you just share in general terms what you found using the female call?
Oh. I'm just not. Yeah. Well, in general terms, using the female call, we seem to have attracted males. Yeah, so the ratio of males to females went up relative to when we were using the male call. Yes, so I would certainly be happy. I'll send you I can send you the call. I'm certain I can find your email address because I know you. Again, it's all preliminary at this point. so I can't really say anything other than the anecdotally it seemed to the female call seemed to work. And by working, how do we define work? I don't know, other than the fact that we had some definite males based on the measurement categories. But most of what we had is we couldn't discern because there was an overlap. But again, like I said, we're going to get my colleague at the University of Scranton to do some DNA work on the blood that we have. I don't know that. I feel like I copped out on that answer, but that's about all I have. So. There was a wind energy in the Gulf and the Gulf Coast. Should we say anything about that? Generally, so here's, I don't know if this is Bob Mulvihill asked this to everyone. Generally, it's my experience, and one of the things that we did here, and again, this is not the Gulf Coast, but we did have a project going early on in my career here where we actually searched underneath. Some students searched under turbines at Bear Creek. I think it was Bear Creek near south here, down by Wilkes-Barre. And we found actually way more bats being affected by the wind, by the turbines than birds. I think we only found like 1 or 2 birds and something like 25 or so bats after searching for like 1 fall migration and 1 spring migration. Paul Curlinger was involved in that. It was a project that he was involved in. But generally, it's my impression, and I don't know a lot about this, but it's my impression that most of the wind energy development is the turbines are more problematic for birds that are not migrating. In other words, it seems like, depending upon the weather, it seems like most of migration occurs at 1,000 to 3,000 feet in the air. And it seems to me like a lot of the impacts associated with turbines, like out in California, have to do with raptors, for example, that are hunting, and they're not paying, and so they're down at the level of the turbines. I would be concerned about turbines, and I know that some of the things that folks have considered doing, like I remember seeing a presentation about some turbines down in Mexico, is turning the turbines off during migration. So I don't know if anybody has any more thoughts on that. I do know that there's some concern about how turbines influence breeding birds, and also how in the development of the land for turbines fragments the habitat, and that in and of itself is potentially detrimental, especially to breeding birds.
There was another good question about ENSO events and relationship to feather mites. And I said, yeah, that'd be nice to look at. And also that I'm interested in the internal parasites as well, and whether or not they're increasing with climate change.
Well, is there any more questions from anyone? All right, well, I think the questions have wrapped up. But Dr. Smith, Dr. Hatch, I really want to thank you for speaking to us this evening. It's really insightful. All the information you shared, and of course quite interesting to me because you're literally in my backyard, so I'm learning more about my own woods.
Okay, well, thank you.
Our pleasure.
Real quick, again, let me emphasize, if anybody has any more questions or wants any information, robert.smith@scranton.edu. Happy to have a discussion. And by the way, if anybody's in the area and wants to come visit birds and see birds in the hand, contact me. We love having visitors.
It looks like you had one last question come through from Lee. Have you done enough owl banding to see different amounts of owls moving in different years?
No. Other people have. Other stations have. We haven't. Well, we've been doing it for probably 5 or 6 years now. Like I said, up until the last 2 years, we don't have enough data to be able to say anything. That's one of the reasons why I'd like to keep the site going, so we can continue on that regard. But when you have a sample size of maybe 10 or 15 birds over the course of a fall, that really isn't enough to say much about the questions like that. That's a good question.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, again, I want to thank you both for presenting. I hope everyone had joined us and found it worthwhile. Gives you another perspective of migration occurring right now. And yes, Lee, we will put his email in the chat for you. But there you go. But all right. Well, thank you both. Thank you all for joining. And hopefully you all enjoy the rest of your evening.